My name is Alina, and I never imagined I'd end up in this place that night when I crossed the threshold of my family's old estate, the corridor lights still and echoing. A few weeks ago, I discovered that my closest family member had torn open a secret I'd held tight to my chest. It felt like a punch to the gut. My hands shook, and my heart pounded as I wandered through rooms that once felt like home. Memories flickered on the walls, framed photographs of childhood laughter, birthday celebrations, summer vacations by the lake. They offered no comfort now. It was my sister, Johanna, who betrayed me. She knew me better than anyone, more than any friend, more than my own reflection, and yet she exposed my most private truth without a second thought. I remember the first time I caught her sharing the news. Her voice was low, almost casual, as if she were discussing the weather. But the words she let slip landed like shards of glass cutting into my chest. When I finally confronted her earlier that evening, I could barely speak. My mouth went dry, my jaw locked. Johanna's eyes darted away, guilt flickering before she masked it with a feigned calm. She claimed she needed someone to lean on, that I never noticed how fragile she'd become. Those words haunted me as I stood in the doorway of her study, watching her scribble in her notebook, page after page in her neat handwriting. On the last page, I found a single line. "I needed comfort because you never saw my pain." That moment, I felt something dark shift inside me. The betrayal wasn't just in her revelation, it was in the way she framed herself as the victim. A cold rage seeped into my veins. My breath caught in my throat, and I steadied myself against the mahogany desk. Everything inside me screamed that I had to respond, but anger alone wouldn't do. I needed precision, quiet measures that would unravel her confidence bit by bit. Later, I sat alone in the drawing room, candlelight dancing on the walls. My plan began to form like a river changing its course, subtle, inevitable, and unstoppable. I pictured the small rumors I'd seed, whispers that would ripple through her circle, friends, neighbors, distant cousins. Nothing direct, nothing that could trace back to me. Just enough to make her question every compliment, every invitation. I imagined her voice shaking at family dinners, glancing over her shoulder as though someone were always watching. My sister and I once shared secrets willingly, late-night talks under the pale moon, shared journals, promises of lifelong loyalty. Now those memories felt cruel, reminders of how quickly trust can fracture. I rubbed my palms together, trying to shake off the memory of her smirk when she watched me reel from her confession. That smirk would become her undoing. As midnight approached, I moved through the silent halls like a shadow, each step measured. I paused at the big oak doors leading to the library, the very room where Johanna and I had spent hours reading side by side. I traced my fingers along the doorframe, recalling how safe that space once felt. Now it was a battleground. I gathered a few innocuous items from her desk, a half-finished letter to a friend, business cards from a meet-up group she'd lied about attending. Small things, but enough to sow doubt if dropped in the wrong place. I slipped them into an envelope, along with a concise note hinting at her hidden agendas. I'd leave it where her trusted circle would find it, on the coffee table in the guest lounge, where afternoon tea gossip brewed. Standing in the dim glow of the hall lamp, I realized how much I'd changed. The cold clarity in my mind felt foreign, yet necessary. My body was tense, heart rattling like loose gears, stomach twisting with a mix of guilt and relief. I swallowed hard, sensing that this was only the beginning. When I finally slipped back to my room and closed the door, the click echoed like a verdict. Behind me, the house stood quiet, but I knew the silence wouldn't last. My plan was set in motion, and soon Johanna would feel the undercurrent of unease I'd created. As I lay down, I heard the mansion's old pipes sigh, as if the house itself braced for what was to come. My breath slowed, but my mind raced ahead, mapping out each move. The first ripple was cast. And somewhere in the dark, I sensed fate shifting, like water carving a new path through stone. That night marked the true start of a game neither of us could walk away from. And as sleep finally claimed me, I knew I'd awakened something in both of us, something that would change everything. I woke with a start to the faint chatter drifting down the corridor. It was barely dawn, the sky outside still heavy with pre-dawn blue, and my heart slammed against my ribs like an alarm bell. I lay frozen for a moment, listening as muffled voices swirled somewhere beyond my door. A quick pulse of triumph rippled through me. My plan was already at work. The moment I stepped into the hallway, I smelled it, the faint metallic tang of fear. My steps were light, but each one felt as loud as a drumbeat. I peeked around the corner and saw her, Darina, hovering near the guest lounge, eyes wide, jaw clenched. She held an envelope in her trembling hand, the paper crinkling as she brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. Her breath came in shallow bursts, and tiny beads of sweat formed along her temples. I watched her stumble toward the grand windows, sunlight filtering through and casting long lines across the Persian rug. She paused there, hands pressed to her chest as though steadying a quake beneath her blouse. My fingers held back, savoring the moment. She didn't know I was standing just out of sight. Her voice was a whisper, low and desperate. "Who would do this to me?" She tore the envelope flap like a knife slicing through flesh and pulled out the contents. As she read, her shoulders sagged, and she gasped, a sound like glass snapping under pressure. She pressed the note against her lips, closed her eyes, and let out a ragged exhale that carried equal parts hurt and rage. I slid back, footsteps silent, and returned to my room. Even as I passed the study door, I felt a twinge of something unwelcome. Guilt? No, something sharper. Regret? But no. My resolve held firm. Later that day, during our usual midday gathering in the sunroom, Darina arrived already rattled. Her hair fell in disarray, and she kept her gaze fixed on the floor. At first, our family exchanged puzzled looks. We'd shared lunch here dozens of times without incident. Now the air felt charged, thick with tension I'd orchestrated. She sat at the head of the table, her favorite seat, but barely touched her tea. Every time someone mentioned her name or asked a question, her eyes flicked upward, panic flickering before she forced a polite smile. I noticed how her hands trembled when she reset her napkin, and I felt a fierce surge of validation. My plan was blossoming exactly as I'd foreseen. As the meal stretched on, rumors began to swirl, soft comments exchanged over chipped china, raised eyebrows when no one was looking. Wilted flowers in the centerpiece might have been a harmless decoration, but tonight they reeked of neglect in Darina's mind. I could see the fear twisting her gut into knots. I slipped away and watched her in the garden. Darina paced the rose garden outside, fingers dancing along the thorny stems as though seeking answers in their pain. Her shoulders curled forward, and her lips parted as if she might cry out, but only hoarse echoes responded. I leaned against the cool glass, chest tight with satisfaction, although a twinge of unease pulsed behind my sternum. A few hours later, I returned to the guest lounge and retrieved the envelope I'd planted. It lay exactly where I'd left it. I carried it back to my room and looked at it like a trophy. Then I burned it in the fireplace, watching the paper curl and smoke until only ash remained. I inhaled the acrid scent, letting it settle in my lungs. As dusk settled, I found myself on those study steps. The room felt smaller now, suffused with anticipation. My hands were steady, like steel wrapped around a blade. But beneath that calm, something unexpected stirred, an ache of longing for what we once shared, a memory of laughter in the library. That ache surprised me. It was easier to hate, to plan revenge, than to face the void she'd left behind. I stood and realized I was at a crossroads. The next move would define everything. My pulse slowed and I traced the outline of a childhood photograph on the desk. Me and Darina, arms entwined, smiles unguarded. I closed my eyes and let the memory wash over me, the warmth of her arm around mine, her head leaning on my shoulder. In that instant, I understood that revenge would cost me more than her trust. But the plan was already in motion, and backing down wasn't an option. My reflection flickered in the study lamp's brass fixture, and I whispered into the silence. "Let's see how far this river flows." The first light of dawn seeped through the tattered curtains of the library. I lingered at the threshold, recalling the ember of doubt I'd planted last night and how it had taken root in Darina's mind. A hush settled across the room, thick with the scent of old books and faint traces of fear. The house felt different now, each shadow seemed to tremble with anticipation. I stepped inside, feet barely making a sound on the worn hardwood, and found a single sheet of paper on the corner of the mahogany desk. It wasn't mine. My pulse quickened. As I approached, the paper slipped, a crumpled photograph, its edges worn, the image faded. I picked it up by a corner, careful not to leave fingerprints. Evidence number 1. The photograph showed Darina and me at the lake, arms around each other, smiling under the summer sun. But someone had torn the image in half down the middle, her face on one fragment, mine on the other. The rip was jagged, as if inflicted in a moment of rage. Holding those torn pieces felt like touching both love and loss simultaneously. I tucked the fragments into my pocket and turned toward her desk. My plan had always been to sow subtle chaos, to watch her stumble. But now I realized she had begun a covert defense of her own. A small pile of opened envelopes had appeared, and at the bottom lay my next proof. Evidence number 2. A screenshot printed on thick paper. A fragment of Darina's chat with her confidant. I'm scared. It's like someone is watching me. I can't sleep, and I don't know who to trust. The text bubbles trembled on the page, marked by the accidental swipe of coffee that smeared the ink. Her confession, her fear, so exposed. Reading those words, I felt a crack open in my chest. She was vulnerable in ways I hadn't fully grasped before. She wasn't just the betrayer or the victim of my scheme, she was a sister caught in her own lonely storm. My hands tightened on the desk edge as conflicting emotions surged, triumph at her anxiety and sorrow at her pain. I placed both proofs back on the desk, arranging them side by side. The torn photograph beside the confession screenshot created a gallery of her fractured soul. I stepped out, letting the door close softly behind me, and leaned against the hallway wall, breath shallow. My body hummed with adrenaline, but beneath it ran a thin river of guilt. Later that morning, I found her in the sunroom, gingerly handling a teacup as though it might shatter. Her eyes, once so full of confidence, flickered with haunted uncertainty. She glanced at the desk through the connecting arch, and I watched as a flicker of recognition crossed her face. Her lips parted silently, and she sank back into her chair, shoulders curling protectively. I realized then that our silent duel had shifted. It was no longer solely about exposing her. She had shown me the hidden wound that drove her to act so recklessly. For a moment, I stood frozen by the arch, watching her. The hush between us felt alive, charged with unspoken truths. My heart throbbed as I remembered the girl who had once confided in me about her fears and dreams. That sister had vanished somewhere between torn photographs and planted rumors. I closed my eyes, letting the memory roll through me like a soft wave, her laughter at midnight, the spark in her eyes when she trusted me completely. When I opened them, I made a choice. My revenge could continue to course down its planned riverbed, or I could redirect its flow. But the plan was already in motion. The next bend awaited, one where our fractured bond would be tested beyond rumors and fear. I stepped forward, crossing the threshold back into the library, heart pounding with equal measures of resolve and doubt. And as the soft light shifted across the proofs on the desk, I whispered into the silence. Now we both know how far this can go. That evening, the mansion seemed to exhale tension as shadows stretched across the corridors. I paused at the top of the grand staircase, listening for the faintest sign of movement. In the distance, I could hear Darina's footsteps ebbing and flowing like a restless tide. My heart hammered against my ribs, the pulse echoing in my ears. I pressed a palm against the banister, feeling its cool varnish beneath my fingertips, and closed my eyes. My breath came in shallow bursts, each inhalation tasting of anticipation and regret. I descended slowly, each step deliberate. Memories of our once carefree laughter followed me like ghosts. The weight of the proofs on my mind felt heavy as stones. I reminded myself, purpose over emotion. But purpose had begun to twist, entwining with strands of empathy I couldn't fully suppress. When I reached the study doorway, I found her there, seated at the desk, head bowed. Her hair spilled around her shoulders like dark silk. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the antique desk lamp. Darina looked up, her eyes wide and glossy. She swallowed hard, as if the air itself carried shards. I approached and caught sight of fresh tears glistening on her lashes, catching the lamplight. My breath caught. Anger and pity wrestled inside me, but I forced my lips into a neutral line. I retrieved the small stack of personal journals I had hidden in a side drawer the night before. They felt familiar in my hands, damp with the faint imprint of her desperation. Inside, hidden beneath lined pages, I had copied intimate entries she never intended to share, her deepest fears about feeling unloved, her quiet admissions that she blamed me for overlooking her pain. I placed the journals on the desk, one at a time. The leather covers snapped open under my fingertips, revealing ribbons of her most private confessions. She gasped, a raw note of betrayal piercing the hush. I pressed a finger to her journal, tracing a shaky line of her handwriting. I wanted her to care. My throat constricted. You wanted me to notice you, I murmured, voice soft but edged with steel. You used my secret to force me to look. Her hands trembled as she laid one journal flat. I was desperate, she whispered. I thought if I risked everything, you'd see me. Her dry mouth made her words catch. The confession hung between us like smoke. I exhaled slowly and leaned forward, the surface of the desk cold against my palms. And you did see me, I said. Too late. My jaw tightened. The old photograph fragments still weighed in my pocket, a silent reminder of our severed bond. But it cost me everything. My voice wavered as guilt and rage collided. I could feel the tight knot in my stomach twist. I realized then that this confrontation would define us both. For a long moment, we simply stared at each other. The air felt electric and oppressive, as if the entire house held its breath. Finally, Darina shut her journal, her movements slow and deliberate. The sound of the leather cover brushing the wood desk seemed deafening. She rose, knees wobbling, and stood face to face with me. I noticed how her shoulders slumped, as though carrying the weight of her own regret. Then she reached into her pocket and withdrew a single photograph shard, the half that bore my face. Her finger traced the edges of the tear, and her lips quivered. I kept this, she said. I never wanted to destroy us. I didn't know another way to be seen. A tremor ran along my spine. My vision blurred with unshed tears. For a heartbeat, I saw my sister not as the architect of my despair, but as a frightened girl crying out for acknowledgement. My carefully crafted plan to unravel her was suddenly painfully fragile. The books lining the shelves seemed to lean in, bearing silent witness. I exhaled and released the tension coiling in my chest. The unspoken question between us, could we salvage what remained? I held out my hand, palm up, and she placed the photograph fragment in my palm. Its jagged edge pressed into my skin, drawing a fine line of warmth. I closed my hand around it, and felt the pulse of her hope and my lingering fury. The lamp flickered, casting our shadows tall on the walls. In that moment, I felt the river of my revenge split into two currents, one pulling me toward retribution, the other towards something like forgiveness. I stepped back and touched my chest, where my heart continued its frantic rhythm. Darina's gaze followed mine, cautious and yearning. Then the floorboards groaned. That morning, I found Darina in the kitchen, standing at the window with a chipped mug clutched between trembling fingers. The steam curled toward the ceiling and vanished, like the peace I'd once known. When she turned, her eyes flicked away, as though she was ashamed to meet mine. The ache in my chest tightened at the sight, but I reminded myself that purpose still mattered. I leaned against the doorframe and watched her for a moment, taking in the way her jaw clenched every time her reflection caught her off guard in the glass. She lifted the mug and took a shallow sip, lips pressed together to keep from crying aloud. The morning sun gave her hair a faint halo, but it did nothing to soften the tension in her posture. I pushed off from the frame and stepped forward. Hey, I said, voice gentle, though my heart thundered. She glanced at me, surprise flashing before she cleared her throat and forced a small nod. "Hey," she echoed, voice husky. The kitchen smelled of burnt toast and anxious silence. I walked over and set a fresh mug of tea on the counter, the warmth seeping through the porcelain. My fingers lingered on the handle longer than necessary. "You didn't sleep much," I said, trying to sound casual, but my throat felt tight. She turned toward the window again, surveying the overgrown garden as though it held answers. "I don't know how," she muttered. "Every creak of the floor feels like someone's waiting to pounce." I winced at the admission. My plan had succeeded too well. Instead of leaving her fragile but intact, I'd left her raw and exposed. My stomach twisted with guilt, so I rubbed my palms against my jeans to steady myself. "I'm sorry," I heard myself say, and the words shocked me more than her. Her head snapped back, and she studied me with suspicion. Then something in her face softened, and her shoulders relaxed as if I'd broken through the final barrier. "I never wanted this," she whispered, voice thick. I felt invisible." Her gaze dropped to the counter, where the tea steam danced between us. She pinched the handle and traced its rim with a thumb. I closed the small distance and placed my hand over hers. The porcelain rattled slightly beneath our combined weight. Her skin was cool, but trembled like a leaf in a late autumn breeze. "I see you now," I said, and it felt like confessing a vulnerability I'd hidden. She didn't pull away. After a heartbeat, she let out a slow exhale. "Then what happens now?" she asked, and I could hear the shaking in her voice. The question hung in the air, heavy and tenuous, like the first fragile threads of a spider's web. I wanted to promise forgiveness, but the images of torn photographs and secret journals crowded my mind. "We decide," I said softly, drawing in a steady breath. "If we keep going, or if we find another way." Her eyes welled, and she nodded. The mug slipped from her grasp and clattered against the tile floor, steam hissing as it scattered. We both jumped, adrenaline spiking through me. I reached down for the broken pieces, careful not to cut my fingers. Each shard reminded me that trust fractured just like glass, beautiful when whole, dangerous when broken. I swept the fragments into a small dustpan and stared at them. She stood back, arms wrapped around herself, uncertain. We didn't speak for a long moment. Then Darina took a step forward and placed a single finger on my arm. "If I'm going to make this right, I need you to tell me what to do." Her voice quivered with hope and fear tangled together. My heart stuttered at the weight of that request. I straightened and met her gaze, seeing in her reflection my own desperation for healing. "First," I said cautiously, "we rebuild trust, but on our own terms." My voice trembled, but I felt a glimmer of clarity. "We set boundaries. We share everything, even when it hurts." "Okay," she whispered. "Let's start." I nodded, though my stomach fluttered with uncertainty. I held her hand, realizing this was just the beginning of a new chapter. The next moment would show us if our fragile truce could hold. When I finally swept the last shiny fragment from the tile floor, I stood and faced Darina, the mug's jagged history still lingering between us. We'd both seen how easily trust could shatter. Now we needed to learn how to piece it back together. Our hands brushed as I guided her toward the worn oak table where we'd shared countless meals. It felt sacred now. She perched on a chair, hair falling in gentle waves around her face. I set a fresh pot of tea on the table and poured 2 cups, steam rising in lazy spirals. The clink of porcelain in the hush felt loud. I slid 1 cup to her and met her gaze. "Do you want to talk about what you're feeling?" I asked softly. Her lips trembled as she looked down at the swirling liquid. "I'm overwhelmed," she admitted, voice breaking. "I know I hurt you. I still feel guilty." Her brow furrowed as if the weight of regret sat between us. I watched her, my heart shifting. Revenge had tasted like ice, but this felt real. "I'm sorry too," I confessed. "I manipulated you. I let anger drive me." Surprise flickered across her face. "I deserved it," she whispered. No, I said firmly. We didn't deserve to tear each other apart. My fingers traced the rim of my cup, thinking of how tangled our roots had grown. I suggested small steps to rebuild, sharing one truth each day, checking in without judgment, and honoring each other's boundaries. Darina nodded, a tear slipping free. I can do that, she said. Over the next few hours, we talked in fits and starts, about childhood forts, our mistakes, and the distance that slipped in unnoticed. There were moments of awkward silence, but also glimmers of laughter when we remembered hiding under blanket tents as kids. Whenever doubt crept in, we followed our rule: share the fear. Each revelation felt like a stone laid toward a fragile bridge between us. By afternoon, we both felt exhausted yet lighter. I suggested a walk in the overgrown garden to clear our heads. Darina hesitated but then agreed. Outside, sunlight filtered through old oaks, and the air smelled of damp earth. We wandered among wildflowers, our steps unhurried. She paused at a broken fountain, marble-stained by time. "It's beautiful in decay," she murmured. I nodded. "Like us," I replied. As we stood there, shoulders almost touching, I sensed a shift in our relationship. The hurt still lingered, but beneath it flowed hope. Yet part of me couldn't ignore the thrill I'd once felt from watching her unravel. A faint tension hummed in my veins. Was forgiveness enough, or would the river of revenge demand more? I didn't want to test her again, but a dormant itch for vindication lingered. Later, back in the sunroom, Darina found one of the journals I'd returned. She rubbed its leather cover, eyes distant. "I keep thinking about those entries," she said, voice soft. "I wrote them when I felt invisible." I recalled how I'd used them to hurt her, and my chest tightened. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry I exploited them." Her tears glimmered. "I don't know if I can fully trust you again," she admitted. My throat closed. She crossed the room and touched my arm. "But I want to try, if you promise you'll never use my secrets against me again." I met her halfway. "I promise," I said. It felt heavy, a vow forged from shards of guilt and remorse. In the days that followed, we kept our ritual. Each morning we exchanged heart checks. One thing we appreciated, one fear we carried. Sometimes I withheld my darker impulses, afraid she'd run. But holding back made the old darkness press at my chest, reminding me of how I'd betrayed her. One afternoon, as she brewed coffee, her phone buzzed. I saw her glance at the screen, anxiety crossing her eyes. She texted quickly, whispering under her breath. My skin pricked. Was she confiding in someone else? Old suspicion stirred. I clenched my jaw. Later, she found me in the garden. "I need to tell you," she said. "It's about last week, when I asked Mom for help. I lied about why." My pulse jumped. "Why?" Her shoulders curled. "I was scared you'd think I was weak," she admitted. The ache returned, how quickly doubt could creep back in. "Darina," I said gently, "you never have to face fear alone." She shivered, and I pulled her into a hug. As I held her, I felt the full weight of our shared scars, betrayal and the tentative repair. My heartbeat steadied, and I realized trust lay not in a single bridge but in every step we took together. That night, I placed a new journal on her pillow with a note. "For you, if you want to share." I left the door ajar, imagining her opening it. In that small gesture lay hope and vulnerability. The next morning, I found it open on my desk, her neat handwriting on the first page. "I forgive you. Help me forgive myself." Beneath those words, she'd drawn a simple heart. My eyes stung. The river between us had slowed, widening to hold the possibility of healing. Yet the current still ran beneath the calm surface, reminding me that our story was far from over. Morning light poured in through the curtains as I sat at my desk, the journal open in front of me. Darina's simple words, "I forgive you. Help me forgive myself," hovered on the page, and I traced the shape of the heart she'd drawn. A warmth spread through my chest, but it was laced with something sharper, the knowledge that forgiveness is fragile, like glass. I closed the journal gently and placed a hand over my heart, feeling its steady rhythm, as if it whispered that we could keep going. I headed to the kitchen where Darina was slicing fresh fruit, humming softly. The ease between us felt new and strange. When she looked up, her eyes met mine and she offered a tentative smile. I returned it, but inside my mind old doubts flickered. Would it truly last? I shook my head to clear the lingering fear and took a seat. She poured me tea, steam curling around her fingers. I watched her hands tremble only slightly, evidence that our rituals were working. Yet a small voice in my gut hinted that peace can slip away faster than a sigh. Our breakfast was quiet but comfortable. We spoke in half sentences, sharing plans for the day, weaving in our morning check. She admitted she was nervous about going to the market alone, fear that someone might mention the rumors. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You're not alone," I said. She inhaled and nodded, pressing her thumb into mine. Her skin felt warm and alive, anchoring me to the present. Afterward, I walked her to the gate of the estate, our footsteps muted on the gravel. She paused, glancing over her shoulder at the looming house. "Promise me something?" she asked, voice small. I halted. "Anything." She hesitated, then said, "If you ever feel the old anger returning, just tell me." My chest clenched at the raw honesty in her plea. I linked my fingers with hers. "I promise," I replied. She released my hand and stepped away, the gate clicking shut with a finality that resonated in my bones. I returned inside, the silence suddenly heavy. I wandered to the library and sat by her journal entry, pondering the promise I'd made. A whisper slid through my thoughts. What if I never told her? The thrill of hidden knowledge still whispered in my head, tempting me. I shook my head. No. Not now. But then my phone buzzed. It was a notification from our neighbor. "Saw someone slipping an envelope under Darina's door." My pulse quickened. The friendly world outside was still tangled in whispers about her. Panic rose in my throat as I imagined Darina discovering a new threat, her fragile trust cracking. I grabbed my coat and rushed toward the servant wing where I'd hidden supplies for her recovery. How deep did this go? Was I enough to protect her from the world beyond our pact? When I reached the hallway, I noticed something on the floor, a single business card, its edges curled, bearing the name of a local club Darina had never mentioned. My breath hitched. It was placed just outside her room. My face warmed with indignation. Someone was testing her, maybe testing me. I snatched the card and slipped it into my pocket. The weight of it was like a challenge. I made my way to Darina's door and knocked softly. No answer. Fear and anger coiled inside me. I realized that our fragile bridge could be tested at any moment. But I also knew that if I let anger rule, everything might collapse. I steadied my breath and knocked again, louder. My hand trembled. Through the door, I heard a breath, uncertain, cautious. I stepped back, heart pounding, and prepared to enter. The next moment would decide whether we reinforced our fragile trust or let it crumble again. The hush around me deepened, and as I placed my hand on the doorknob, I whispered, "Let's see if we can walk through this together." When I pressed my palm against the doorknob, a thin crack of light seeped around its frame. I took a deep breath and turned the handle, stepping inside the dimly lit room. There she was, Darina, seated on the edge of her bed, the business card clutched in one hand and a flicker of fear in her eyes. The soft glow of a bedside lamp revealed fine lines of tension around her mouth. She looked up, startled. "Alina," she whispered. I closed the door gently behind me and walked over, careful not to jar the silence. "I found this outside your door," I said, extending the card. Her fingers trembled as she reached out. The card bore the name of a club she had never mentioned, and the ink on it was slightly smudged, as though it had been handled by nervous hands. She turned it over, reading the back, a hastily scrawled note. "We know what you did." Her breath hitched. The familiar swell of guilt rose in my chest, but I forced it down. I reminded myself why we had started this fragile truce, to rebuild, to protect each other from shadows. They're trying to scare you, I said softly. She nodded, eyes brimming with tears. I thought I was safe here, she murmured. I handed her my coat and motioned toward the bathroom. Let's wash your hands, clear your head. Together we walked to the sink, and I turned the tap. The water ran cold and steady. She held the card under the stream, letting the edges soften. I watched her reflection in the mirror. She looked smaller somehow, vulnerable. I reached out and gently lifted her chin so our eyes met. You're safe with me, I promised. Once her hands were clean, I examined the card for hidden details. On the corner, faint fingerprints had smudged the paper. I suggested we inspect it further. I fetched a magnifying glass from my drawer and returned. Under its lens, I saw a tiny fingerprint smudge and a faint stain of coffee grounds. Whoever sent it had done so quickly, and likely slipped away unnoticed. But this was our opening, a clue. We decided to retrace Darina's steps from earlier that morning. Maybe she had brushed against someone or dropped the card herself before finding it on the floor. We moved quietly through the house, checking the corridor and the garden path. The gravel outside her window was undisturbed, but near the servant wing I spotted a scrap of paper, a torn corner matching the card's thickness. I picked it up, a tiny fragment of notebook paper with a single word. Soon. A chill ran through me. Someone was orchestrating this, someone with inside knowledge, observing our every move. My mind raced, balancing between rage at the intruder and fear for my sister's safety. I locked eyes with Darina. Her posture stiffened, but she nodded, trusting me to lead. Back in the study, I laid out the card, the coffee-stained fragment, and the note scrap on the desk like a crime board. I pored over every detail, tracing possible routes and timelines. Darina stood beside me, leaning closer, her shoulder brushing mine. The physical closeness sent a jolt through me, tender yet potent. We were partners in this now. I proposed a plan. We would flip the game. If they wanted to toy with Darina's mind, we would toy with theirs. We'd leave a false trail. First, we'd craft a reply, a note slipped under their door inviting them to meet in the garden at midnight. We'd take photographs of the entryway, set up a discreet camera, and wait. Then we'd unmask them. Her lips quivered, but she agreed. We spent the afternoon preparing, writing the note on aged paper, matching the club card's font style. I stacked books near the garden trellis to mimic a missing step in the archway, ensuring our invader would step into view. As we worked side by side, our movements flowed in sync, like two branches brushing in a current. When dusk fell, we slipped outside. The clipped hedges formed a silent maze around us. I handed Darina a small flashlight and led her to the hidden camera I'd installed. She placed it on a low branch and pressed record. Then we hid behind the fountain, hearts pounding. Under the moon's pale glow, a figure emerged, shadows wavering. They paused at the note on the ground. I felt Darina's grip tighten on my arm. The next moments would decide everything, whether we protect our fragile bond or watch it shatter once more. Our breaths synchronized as we held our ground, ready for the river's current to reveal its truth. When the figure stepped into the garden's clearing, Darina's breath caught in her throat. We crouched behind the fountain, its marble rim cold against my palm, and watched as a tall silhouette paused beneath the arch of climbing roses. Moonlight traced smooth lines along their shoulders. I could hear my heart drumming in my ears. My body felt electric. My fingers tingled where they pressed against Darina's back. I leaned closer and whispered, "Stay still." My voice cracked, betraying my nerves. Darina's nod was barely visible, but her grip on my arm tightened like a lifeline. The figure knelt and picked up the note we'd left. Paper rustled. They turned it around, fingertips brushing the words. I saw the flash of a familiar coat pocket. I'd seen the same fabric in the servant wing earlier. A jolt of recognition slashed through me, followed by ice-cold anger. Suddenly, the figure dropped the note and bolted toward the back gate. "There!" Darina hissed. We sprang from our hiding place, but I hesitated for a fraction too long, caught between protecting her and confronting the intruder. The gravel crunched under their sprinting feet. I took off after them, Darina just a step behind. My lungs burned as cold night air filled them. Under the hedges and laurel, our feet churned the earth. My hands itched to reach out, to stop them. But I chased shadows. They reached the gate and yanked it open. I lunged, catching the edge of the latch, fingers scraping against metal. The figure skidded forward. My body tensed, muscles coiled like springs. I lurched, and Darina slammed into my side. Together we stumbled forward, following the footsteps that led beyond the garden's boundary. They disappeared into the moonlit field, tall grass brushing past our knees. I pressed a hand to my mouth to catch my pounding heart, and Darina inhaled sharply beside me. The silence after their flight was louder than any scream. "Do you think it was?" Darina began, voice trembling. I cut her off, breathless. "It was Martin," I said, using the caretaker's name that suddenly made sense. I remembered his odd glances and hushed whisper to the head gardener. "He's been sneaking around," I realized. Darina frowned. "But why him?" Her voice was small. I felt my jaw tighten. "He wanted the property," I said. "He's been here for years, watching our family's history. He must have found the journal entries I left out to trap him." My chest tightened, a swell of regret and pride twisting together. He thought we'd blame him for everything. My stomach churned. We trudged across the field, following footprints until they ended near a broken fence. The gap was narrow. We knelt and examined fresh soil and a fabric thread caught on a splintered board, green wool, the same shade Martin wore. Darina's hand trembled as she ran a finger along the thread. "He almost got away," she whispered. The wind lifted our hair, and the moon pulled shadows across the scene. I brushed a loose strand from Darina's face. My hand lingered on her cheek, cool in the night. "It's okay," I said, though neither of us felt safe. "We caught him." My voice wavered. She reached for my hand, and we stood side by side. The field seemed endless, but we were no longer alone. I felt the weight of my promise to protect her settle in my bones. In that moment, our fragile alliance hardened into resolve. We guided each other back to the garden gate, dragging weary feet through the dew-soaked grass. Every step felt heavy, but purposeful. Waves of relief washed over me as I realized the threat had been real, and so had our plan. When we reached the gate, I paused and looked back at the field. The broken fence stood like an open wound under the moon's glare. My throat tightened. "Tomorrow," I said quietly, "we confront him." Darina nodded, eyes bright and determined despite the fear still lingering there. We slipped back into the garden, closing the gate behind us so gently the latch barely clicked. I held my breath, listening for any sound, then exhaled. The mansion loomed ahead, windows like blank eyes. As we walked toward the fountain, my legs unsteady, I realized how close we'd come to losing everything again. Yet we'd found each other in the darkness. Darina's hand found mine, fingers curling around mine like a promise renewed. Under the silent stars, I vowed that no shadow would ever come between us again. And as the moon dipped behind the clouds, I knew our journey was far from over, but for the first time, we had a chance to rebuild on solid ground. That dawn, the house felt strangely empty as Darina and I crept toward the servants' wing. Our breaths were shallow, and my palms felt slick against the notebook I'd tucked under my arm. I could hear every creak of the floorboards, each one a reminder of how close we'd come to losing everything. We slipped into the narrow hallway where Martin usually kept his coat and tools. The air was cool, and the low hum of pipes sounded like a distant heartbeat. Darina's voice caught in her throat. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered. I swallowed, feeling the cool rush of adrenaline. "Yeah. We need answers. And you deserve an apology." My jaw tightened. "He needs to know he can't toy with us." I knocked on the door, light, deliberate. Martin, startled. "Yeah?" floated through the wood. I pushed it open just enough to slip inside. He was bent over a workbench, tools scattered like fallen leaves. When he looked up, his face paled. "Alina?" he said, voice catching. I stepped in, closing the door behind me. The hinges groaned as if warning him. My heart hammered in my ears, and I felt the familiar twist of regret and resolve collide in my chest. Beside me, Darina hovered, gripping the notebook so tightly her knuckles blanched. Martin straightened, wiping grease from his hands. His eyes flicked between us, and I saw the first real crack in his composure. You were just trying to scare her, I said, voice quiet but firm. You thought you could drive a wedge between us. Why? My throat went dry. The words came out on a rough breath. He swallowed, shoulders slumping. I'm sorry. I thought if I scared her enough, maybe she'd leave the estate, and I could. His voice trailed off. He ran a hand through his hair, eyes downcast. Darina stepped forward, voice trembling. You almost destroyed us. Her words hung heavy in the stalled air. I watched Martin's chest rise and fall. Guilt seeped into his posture like water into a sponge. I know, he rasped. His gaze lifted to meet hers, and I saw shame in the way his eyes flickered. I was desperate. The estate's finances are a mess. I thought I could buy time, maybe scare her into selling her share, so I could patch things up before anyone knew. His hands shook. I didn't mean to hurt her. I panicked. Darina's face crumpled with conflicting emotions, hurt, anger, pity. She looked at me, and before I could stop her, she sat heavily on a nearby stool, head in hands. Martin hesitated, then crossed the room and knelt in front of her. I'm sorry, he repeated, voice breaking. He placed a hand gently on her knee, an awkward gesture of contrition. I felt a tug, part sympathy, part outrage. My pulse thundered. The ache in my chest deepened as I remembered all the fear we'd endured. But I also saw Martin's genuine regret, the tremor in his voice, the tear glistening at the corner of his eye. Darina pulled back, wiping her tears on the sleeve of her sweater. She bit her lip, body trembling. You scared me, she said, voice low. I thought the rumors, the threats. I thought it was me being punished for something I didn't even do. She looked at me, fear and relief mingling in her eyes. I exhaled, the sound loud in the hush. He knows now, I said softly, reaching for her hand. She glanced at me, and I nodded for her to stand. Together, we faced Martin. The three of us formed a fragile triangle in that narrow room. Martin swallowed and rose to his feet. He looked at each of us, like searching for permission to go on. I'll make it right, he said, voice firming. I'll help fix the estate. I'll refund any costs, speak to the family, do whatever it takes. His shoulders squared, and I felt the tension in the room shift. Darina's jaw clenched as she studied him. Then she exhaled, the sound small but significant. All right, she said. But you have to work with us. No more secrets. No more lies. Her gaze hardened. Ever. He nodded vigorously. Ever. His relief was palpable. I felt a mixture of victory and weariness. The river of our revenge had bent back on itself, carrying us towards something neither of us had expected, resolution. But I also knew the currents still ran deep beneath the surface. As we left the servants' wing, Martin trailing behind to collect his tools, Darina slipped her arm through mine. Her grip was warm, steady. I met her gaze, and she gave a small, sad smile, an unspoken acknowledgement that healing would be messy, but possible. The corridor stretched ahead, light filtering through high windows. I realized this confrontation had shifted everything, our pact, our family dynamics, even my own heart. Forgiveness had met vengeance, and created a new channel, a path neither of us fully understood yet, but one we were ready to walk together. We emerged back into the morning sun, and I inhaled the cool air as though tasting freedom. Beside me, Darina lifted her face to the light. Thank you, she murmured. My lips curved into a tired, genuine smile. We did it together. And as we stepped toward the great hall, the house seemed to exhale with us, ready for whatever came next. Our story, our river, would keep flowing. Morning light filtered through the grand hall windows as Darina and I walked side by side toward the family portrait gallery. Each step echoed softly on the hardwood floor. We still felt the aftershocks of last night's revelation, but our shoulders no longer carried the weight of deception alone. Darina paused before the largest painting, our grandmother's stern gaze fixed through time. She traced the gilded frame with a fingertip and exhaled. "We need to face everyone today," she said quietly. I nodded, recalling the anxious morning gatherings we had once shared. "Together," I replied, offering her a steady glance. She smiled faintly. A hush fell as we entered the sunlit gallery where relatives had gathered for our weekly morning tea. Faces turned toward us, some curious, some wary. Aunt Sophia's lip clenched, and Cousin Mark's eyebrows lifted. I squeezed Darina's hand and guided her to the center. "Good morning," I began, voice calm but firm. "Darina and I have something we'd like to share." Murmurs spread through the room like ripples. Darina took a deep breath. "I know there have been rumors circulating," she said, voice wavering. "I want to apologize for any distress I caused. I've learned that secrecy can hurt more than healing." Her eyes met mine, and I felt a surge of pride. "I manipulated her," I admitted softly. "I used fear to teach a lesson, but I lost sight of compassion." A stunned silence followed. Then Aunt Sophia's stern expression softened. "Honesty takes courage," she said. The room exhaled collectively. Our relatives listened as we recounted the threats from Martin and how we confronted him. We spoke of the vow to protect each other and reconcile the estate's troubles together. No one interrupted. For the first time in weeks, I felt our family truly united. After our confession, several cousins approached, offering quiet embraces. Aunt Lena handed Darina a cup of tea, her fingers warm on hers. I caught Darina's eye. She squeezed my hand gratefully. Later that afternoon, we returned to Darina's study to review the estate's finances. Martin stood beside us, ready to assist. His face held regret, but also determination. Together, we pored over ledgers and bills, untangling debts and planning repairs for the old mansion roof. The rhythm of collaboration soothed my mind. Each line we balanced felt like a brick restored. Darina and I took turns reading entries aloud. Our voices intertwined in a harmonious cadence, a stark contrast to the whispered threats that had filled the silence before. As noon became afternoon, we took a break in the rose garden. Sunlight warmed the petals on our cheeks. Darina handed me a freshly picked bloom, its scent delicate. "Thank you," she said again. I tucked the flower behind my ear and watched her eyes soften. "I couldn't have done this without you," she admitted. "I was broken, and you forced me to face my fear. Then you helped me rebuild." My throat closed. We rebuilt together. When evening fell, the hallways hummed with renewed life. Candlelight flickered in sconces, and laughter drifted from the dining room. I paused at the doorway and inhaled. Family dinners used to feel stifling. Now they seemed welcoming. Darina joined me, slipping her arm through mine. "This feels right," she whispered. I nodded, feeling the river of our story turn a gentle bend, no longer jagged, but flowing steadily toward whatever lay ahead. Together, we stepped into the dining room, ready to face both challenges and joys as sisters once more. The past's currents had carved deep channels, but we had navigated them together. And as we crossed the threshold, I knew our bond would keep us afloat no matter the storms to come. The dawn light filtered gently through the lace curtains as I slipped quietly from my room. The hall's polished floors gleamed under my soft footsteps, and I could already hear the faint clatter of dishes from the dining room where Darina and I had shared our first truly peaceful dinner in weeks. I paused outside the doorway, listening to the low murmur of voices, Aunt Sophia sorting out accounts with Cousin Mark, Martin reviewing repair schedules, and Darina's friend Elena offering quiet encouragement. Stepping inside, I caught Darina's eye across the long table. She smiled, warmth radiating in her gaze. Our morning ritual of shared gratitude and honest fears felt like a fragile bloom, beautiful, but still vulnerable. I took my seat beside her, and we clasped hands for a moment before the conversation turned to the day's tasks. "We should finalize the guest list for the family gathering next week," Aunt Sophia said, arranging envelopes in neat piles. "We need to be sure everyone understands the new boundaries." Darina nodded, her fingers tightening around her teacup. I sensed her nerves. Even in forgiveness, tension lingered. I leaned close and whispered, "We'll handle it together." After breakfast, we retreated to the study. Martin had already spread blueprints of the estate's gardens on the desk. He pointed out weak spots in the greenhouse walls and sketched plans for reinforcing the wrought iron trellis. Darina and I exchanged glances. This collaboration felt like a promise held in our joint efforts. I suggested adding native wildflowers to the design to attract pollinators, a small idea that brightened her smile. The morning passed in a steady rhythm, laughter, strategic planning, and shared victories over stubborn paperwork. Yet beneath the calm, I still felt the old river of suspicion lurking, ready to surge at the slightest tremor. I caught myself scanning the windows for signs of new threats, and I reminded myself that trust required patience. By midday, Darina and I slipped away for a walk along the gravel drive. The air smelled of fresh earth and blooming roses. She paused beside the old oak at the driveway's curve, the same spot where we had confronted each other months ago. She ran her fingers along its rough bark. "I never thought we'd be here again," she said softly, voice edged with wonder and caution. "The tree looks the same, but everything feels different." I reached out and rested my hand over hers on the trunk. "We're different," I replied. "We've both changed." The breeze stirred her hair, and for a moment I forgot the weight of past betrayals. We stood in silence, united by the shared scars we wore like secret badges. Our moment was broken when a carriage rolled down the drive, gravel crunching under the wheels. A figure stepped down, the distant cousin Lena, whose hushed gossip had fueled some of the old rumors. She approached with a polite nod, her expression courteous but guarded. "Alina, Darina," she said, voice smooth. "I heard about the changes here and wanted to see how you're both doing." Darina offered her a tentative smile. "Welcome, Lena. We're finding our way." Lena's eyes flicked to the garden plans spread across the back seat, then to our linked hands. "I trust you've resolved the misunderstandings?" she asked, a deliberate emphasis on the past. My heart jolted. I recognized that careful tone of suspicion. Darina squeezed my hand, and I drew a quiet breath. "We have," I said steadily. "We've rebuilt our trust and are working on the estate together." I nodded toward Martin, who had slipped outside to supervise the gardeners. "Martin's here helping us, too." Lena glanced over her shoulder as he emerged, wiping soil from his hands. She offered a strained smile. "Glad to see things moving forward." Then she lowered her voice. "Just be careful whom you trust." Before Darina or I could respond, she lifted her chin and swept a polite farewell, retracing her steps to the carriage. As the wheels turned and her silhouette receded, I felt a surge of both relief and lingering wariness. Darina exhaled beside me, shoulders relaxing. "She always did love drama," she said wryly. I chuckled, tension easing from my chest. "Let's prove her wrong." We walked back toward the house hand in hand, ready to face our family gathering with renewed solidarity. The old river of betrayal still ran beneath the surface, but our current had shifted. We were determined to guide its flow together, no longer victims or adversaries, but sisters forging a new path. Sunlight slanted across the marble foyer as we stepped inside, carrying the last of the tea set's empty cups. My hand still tingled from Lena's parting words. "Be careful whom you trust," echoing in my mind like distant thunder. Darina caught my eye, and I saw that familiar flicker of shared resolve. We'd weathered so much together, but the morning breeze through the front door felt charged with one more test. We moved toward the drawing room where preparations for the family gathering were already underway. Long tables draped in linen waited for place settings, and fresh flowers sat in vases, petals trembling as though sensing our tension. Martin was instructing the gardener on rose placements near the windows, each instruction clipped and precise. When he saw us, His shoulders straightened, and he offered a curt nod, solidarity in his gaze. "I'll finish out here," he said, turning back to the blooms. His shirt cuffs bore flecks of soil, and his jaw looked set, as though he'd sealed some silent promise in his knuckles. I wondered if he still felt guilt coursing beneath his calm exterior. Darina slipped beside me, voice low. "I hate feeling like a stranger in my own home," she whispered, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Her hand brushed mine, and I squeezed gently. "You're not," I replied, trying to steady my own fluttering heart. "We've come a long way." Inside, Aunt Sophia fussed over silverware, her lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced up, and for a moment I held my breath. Would she trust our story? Then she gave a small, approving nod and returned to her polishing, as if granting us quiet permission to belong. We arranged mismatched china on the table, each played a memory of past celebrations. As I set one cup beside another, my fingers brushed the rim, and I felt a jolt of gratitude mixed with dread. The old currents of doubt still rippled beneath the surface. What if Lena's warning had been right? What if someone in this room planned to reopen old wounds tonight? A distant murmur floated down the corridor. Arrivals. I smoothed the crease in my dress and took a deep breath. Darina joined me at the entrance, shoulders squared. We faced the hallway together, ready. The first guests arrived. Uncle Pavel led Cousin Mark, whose eyes swept the room with polite curiosity. They chatted about the ground's new repairs, but I caught Mark's gaze linger on the study door. I followed his glance and felt that familiar prick of unease. Next came Elena, Darina's longtime friend. Her expression softened when she saw us, and she crossed the room with quick steps. She wrapped Darina in a warm hug, breathing in the scent of her hair. "You two look peaceful," she whispered. Darina smiled, but I noticed her shoulders droop slightly, as though she carried an invisible weight despite Elena's reassurance. As more relatives filtered in, the room filled with the soft clink of crystal and the low hum of conversation. I moved among them, offering gentle hellos and measured smiles. Each interaction felt like walking a tightrope, balancing our hard-won trust with the fragile calm of those around us. When everyone had gathered, Aunt Sophia tapped her spoon against the glass. The room stilled, and I felt the hush settle like warm velvet. She cleared her throat, then nodded at Darina. My sister's voice wavered as she stood, but she held her ground. "Thank you all for coming," Darina began, eyes sweeping the faces before her. "We've been through difficult times. But today, we celebrate not just this home, but our commitment to each other." She paused, shoulders lifting and falling with controlled breath. "We hope you'll join us in making this night one of unity, not division." Applause fluttered around the room, tentative at first, then more heartfelt. I exhaled a silent relief and moved back to Darina's side. As glasses were filled and forks poised, I felt the river of tension ease into something like hope. Aunt Sophia raised her glass. "To family," she said firmly. "May our bonds grow stronger." We echoed the toast, lips brushing crystal, and I felt warmth flood through me. The chatter resumed, lighter now, threaded with laughs at old stories and plans for future gatherings. Lena's absence tugged at me, but I told myself she'd come around once she saw our resolve in person. Later, as candles flickered on the sideboard, Darina and I slipped away to the balcony overlooking the rose garden. The night air was cool, the scent of blossoms drifting up to us. She leaned against the railing, cheeks flushed. "I almost didn't make it through that speech," she admitted, voice soft. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You did," I said. "Tonight proved something, for them, and for us." My heart swelled as I looked back toward the lights spilling from the drawing room. The laughter and music floated up like a promise. She rested her head on my shoulder. "I believe it," she murmured. "I believe we can keep this going." I kissed the top of her head, tasting the night's gentle promise. "We will," I whispered, and in that moment I knew the current beneath us had shifted for good. Below, the gathering shimmered with warmth. And as we stood there together, I realized our story's river had finally found calmer waters. Though I knew the journey ahead would hold new bends and challenges, we would face them side by side. The night air felt crisp against my skin as Darina and I lingered on the balcony, the distant laughter from below drifting up like a lullaby. I slipped an arm around her waist, drawing her closer against the soft hum of cicadas. She rested her cheek on my shoulder, and I could feel the slow, steady rise and fall of her breath beneath my fingertips. For a moment, the world beyond our little sanctuary ceased to exist. "I almost forgot what peace feels like," she murmured, voice tender and low. The street lamps cast her profile in soft relief, her lashes brushing her cheeks, her lips curving into a gentle, weary smile. I kissed the top of her head. "We've earned this," I said, though my heart still fluttered with the adrenaline of last night's confrontation. She shook her head, a half-laugh escaping her lips. "Earned?" she asked. "More like clawed back from the brink." Her hand slid down to mine, fingers curling into mine until I felt the warmth of her skin seeping through my palm. The touch grounded me, reminded me why every sharp edge of revenge had been necessary. A breeze rustled the ivy climbing the balcony's railing, and I glanced down to the rose garden, where moonlight made petals glisten like tears. My mind drifted back to the broken fence we'd found, the shreds of marten's wool snagged on the splintered wood. Even as we rebuilt trust, I realized the scars of betrayal would linger in every shadow. "I think tomorrow we'll start on the west wing," I said, surprising myself with the domestic normalcy of my tone. "Repair that old veranda roof before winter." Darina nodded, though I detected a flicker of hesitation in her amber eyes. Her gaze drifted inside, to the half-open window where a pale beam of light spilled onto the polished floor. "I found something in my study today," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "After Lena left." My chest tightened, her confession sounded ominous. We slipped back through the French doors into the drawing room, where the candles still burned low. Darina moved toward her father's old writing desk and lifted a tarnished silver frame from its surface. Inside was a photograph of us as children, wrapped in our grandmother's shawl under this very balcony. But tucked behind the photo I saw a folded piece of paper. I set the frame down gently and unfolded the scrap, a receipt from a therapist's office, dated the year before our parents' accident, a session paid for by Darina, address scribbled in a shaky hand. My breath caught. The memory of her whispered confessions about feeling invisible. Had I really known the depths of her despair? Darina's voice trembled. "I kept it hidden, even from you." Her fingers traced the receipt's stained corners, as though feeling its weight for the first time. "I thought if I could just fix myself without burdening anyone." She looked up, eyes glistening. "I was ashamed." My throat went dry. I swallowed around the lump. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Pride, fear, that gnawing shame that had driven her to expose my secret. She bit her lip, tears finally spilling free. "I thought I had to prove I was okay," she confessed. "And when I couldn't, I lashed out. I used your secret because I didn't know how else to make you see me." Her shoulders shook as she hugged herself. I stepped forward and wrapped her in my arms. Her head found my chest, and I felt the steady beat of her heart, the same rhythm that had faltered when she thought she'd lost me. "You don't have to prove a thing," I murmured against her hair. "Not to me, not to anyone." She lifted her face, tears glistening on her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice cracking. "For everything." I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, the gesture simple but full of meaning. "We both did what we thought we had to," I said softly. "But we're still here, together." Behind us, the candles guttered, sending a warm glow across the room. I held her closer, feeling the tight coil of tension unwind in my chest. Yet I knew our journey wasn't over. The year-old pain, the hidden therapy sessions, even Lena's thinly veiled doubts, all reminded me that trust was a fragile bloom. The hush of the drawing room settled around us as we stood there, two sisters bound by blood and scars. Tomorrow, we would face the West Wing's repairs, and eventually the full truth of our childhood wounds. But tonight, in the flicker of candlelight, we allowed ourselves a moment of grace. And as the last ember of flame danced in the hearth, I realized that the true promise of our story lay not in revenge nor perfect forgiveness, but in the quiet choice to stay, broken, hopeful, and irrevocably entwined. We turned together toward the hearth, and the night held its breath, waiting for dawn. We turned together toward the hearth, and the night held its breath, waiting for dawn. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the high windows, painting lines across the rug. I rose first, the old boards creaking under my weight, and felt a dull ache in my shoulders from yesterday's planning session. Darina appeared behind me, her hair undone, pajamas slipping off one shoulder. She rubbed sleep from her eyes with a slow, measured gesture, and I realized we both moved more carefully now, as if afraid to disturb the fragile calm we built. "I guess we should start on that west wing," I said quietly, sipping the tea I'd poured. The porcelain warmed my fingers through its cool surface. "Yeah," she replied, voice husky with sleep. She reached for her mug, hands still trembling slightly. I watched her, heartbeat softening as I remembered the fear that had led her to burn the receipt and hide her pain. Outside, the air was crisp, dew still clinging to the grass. We grabbed work gloves and tools from the shed, our steps tentative but determined. As we walked across the lawn, my boots sank into the wet ground, and I felt a familiar thrill of purpose. The west wing looked weary, shutters drooped, paint peeled, and the roof's wooden beams sagged like tired backs. It was our mission now. Darina wiped her palms on her jeans and took a deep breath. "I'm ready," she said, voice low. Her green eyes caught mine with a mix of resolve and nervousness. I nodded and handed her a hammer. "Let's take it one board at a time," I suggested. She smiled, the curve of her lips shaky but real. We worked in silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hammering echoing against empty walls. My muscles burned as I pried loose broken planks and replaced them with fresh oak, each new piece clicking into place like progress. Darina knelt beside me, chiseling away old mortar between bricks. Dust rose around her, settling on her dark hair, and when she stood, she brushed it away with a curt nod. Every time she glanced my way, I caught a flicker of pride in her expression, but also a shadow of doubt, like a ghost I still hadn't exorcised. I paused and laid a hand on her shoulder, feeling the warmth beneath her shirt. Her body shifted under my touch, tension melting away. "You're doing great," I said, voice gentle. She exhaled, wiping sweat from her forehead. "So are you." As midday approached, we stepped back to admire the section of wall we'd repaired. The wood looked solid, the paint fresh. For a moment, the west wing seemed less haunted by our past mistakes. I felt a swell of hope. But then I remembered the receipt, the tears, the nights we'd spent in silence. Healing wouldn't be finished when the last board was nailed. It would be ongoing. Darina nudged me with her elbow, jolting me from my thoughts. "Thank you," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Sweat glistened on her skin like morning dew. "For everything." My heart twitched. "Thank you for trusting me," I replied. We stood in the sun, the repaired wall behind us, and for the first time I believed those words. Later, as we cleaned our tools, we talked about what came next, family gatherings without fear, new routines to check in on each other, and maybe a shared journal to record honest thoughts. My hands were raw from work, but I flexed my fingers and admired the feeling of being fully present. Before we headed back, Darina surprised me by pulling an envelope from her pocket. "I found this," she said, handing it over. I recognized the handwriting, mine. Inside was a note I'd written weeks ago, promising no more secrets. I unfolded it, and the paper crackled. Tears welled in my eyes as I read. "I'll always choose you." She reached out and placed her hand over mine, fingers lacing together. The warmth spread through me, and I felt closure settle in my chest. The river of our story had carved new channels, digging deep wells of trust beneath its surface. We packed our tools and walked back toward the house, our steps easy and in sync. The repaired west wing caught the morning light, its silhouette strong against the sky. I glanced at Darina, and she caught my gaze. In that look, I saw forgiveness, resilience, and a future wide open. And those scars would remain, both on the mansion's walls and in our hearts. We'd built something stronger from the pieces. Together. The river had carried us here, and I knew it would keep flowing, guided by our shared promise and the steady current of sisterhood.